We have still probably about 2 more weeks to go until it's completely done, but it's looking absolutely amazing. As I keep on saying to the builders who keep apologising for going overtime, I keep saying, look, this is fine. This looks way better than we were expecting it to look. One of the things that has been really, I suppose, core to who we are as a church has been this idea that if we're going to make a difference in our world, then it starts at home. It starts in the community that God has placed us in. And a question that I felt God asked me many, many years ago was, if you were to close your doors tomorrow, would the community that you're based in even know that you had shut down? And it got me thinking about churches and the way we interact with our communities, because quite oftentimes, especially in Australia, your faith is something that's personal, it's something that is private, it's not something that you share all that much, unless you're one of those crazy people, and apologies if you're one of those crazy people, that go down to the mall and stand on a milk crate and preach the gospel. But for the majority of Christians in Australia, it's very, very difficult to have an impact in their local community outside of looking a little bit like a fruitcake. And we were, as a church leadership, we're really, really passionate about providing a way for our church to actually make a major difference. So when we purchased the old Village Green Tavern and started to do it up, we decided that we weren't going to do it up as a building for us, but we're going to do it up as a place for our community. And I can say with absolute confidence today that if Grace Church was to completely leave this community, our community would definitely feel it. They definitely would know that we're no longer here because of what we've been able to do over these last 5 years. And we're only just beginning. That centre that we've been upgrading has been happening in the face or in the eyes of our local community, and many of them have had experiences in the old Rugby Tavern and have now had experiences there where they have been involved in various community meetings that have been taking place there. Just about every day of the week something's happening down at the Grace Centre, and it's been an absolute blessing for us as a church to be able to serve our community in this way. Oftentimes people are asked the question when somebody's doing something, well, what's in it for you? Politicians face that all the time. When they go out and do something good in the community, people are going, oh, you just want our votes. And it's been really wonderful being able to do something in our community where we're able to say there's nothing in this for us. Actually, it's costing us quite a lot of money, it's costing us a lot of effort, but we're doing this for you because that's what God's like. He does stuff for us without expecting anything back. Now, obviously, God wants something back from us. He wants a relationship. And obviously, we want something back from our community. We want them to know the love of God. But at the end of the day, whether they respond in a positive manner or don't, we're still going to love them by serving them. And we have this incredible opportunity with that massive facility that we have now of being bold and being upfront to our entire community, let them know that we really do care. And it's been fantastic, and you have been part of that. And we want to really thank every single person who has given their money, who's given their time, who's given their prayers, who's given their energy toward what we're doing down there. We are part of something that is making a difference in a local Australian community, which is fantastic. We're not just doing stuff overseas, we're doing something here in Australia, and I honestly believe that if you want to make a real difference for God, then you've got to do it. You've got to start it at home, and we've been able to do that. Now, speaking about what we're doing in the community over these next 2 weeks, I've asked a great friend of mine who has been involved in Grace Church ever since we came back down to Tasmania back in 1943, I think it was. 42. Back in 2001. He and his wife have been part of our church. Many of you would know Louise because of her role as our missions director here at Grace. for a very, very long time, actually. She's been doing that for quite... She's tried to quit a few times, but we've said, well, you can't. But her husband has been just as involved behind the scenes with all that we've been doing here at Grace, and he's been an incredible support of the ministry here. But he's also, in his work life, has had incredible opportunities to make a major difference in the community. Actually, Matt, and this fine, handsome man down the front here, he was the reason that I was able to, I suppose, get as much traction as I did when we first bought the Grace Centre, because he was running Mission Australia Housing at the time, based here in Clarendon. And because of his connections, he was able to introduce me and get me involved, and it has been an incredible opportunity for our church, because somebody was already out there in the community to make some great inroads. And that's one of the strengths of Matt. He's really good at connecting people up, which is one of the reasons that we've asked him to come and share over these next 2 weeks at Grace, to talk about how you can actually get involved in helping in a larger way, in a bigger way. Now, the reality of it is, your first community that you are involved in is your family. Then the next one outside of that is your work and the places that you go naturally. But God has corporately planted our church in a community. So when you have some extra margin, there are some amazing opportunities that are constantly opening up here in this community that we want you to be able to have a place in as well. So why don't you put your hands together and welcome Matt as he comes today.
There's so many bits and pieces. I feel like I need a Batman-esque utility belt to very into. Anyway, hello, church.
Thank you.
Really excited to be able to talk with you today. One of the things today, I'll warn you from the outset, it could well be quite depressing for you. And it's part of the reason why I wore my happiest shirt today, even though Lou would disagree with that. But and I was talking to Gus a bit about this. In the style of Dermot Cooley, if you're depressed today, you need to come back next week. Next week is going to be encouraging sessions. So one of the things, I guess, we were praying earlier, and Jay Kiker actually prayed a prayer, and I think that's my prayer for myself and for everyone here this morning, is that as I talk today, God would shake what needs to be shaken, and the things that remain, I pray they'll remain for you. What I want to talk about today is challenging, and it's challenging for me. I'm preaching it to myself. And I think really, when we talk about what we're doing at the moment, as Dermot talked about before, there's a lot of us doing a lot of things. And it's not a message that says you're not doing well enough, you need to do more. It's challenging you to think about what God is saying to you. And that's really where I want to start, is to challenge you to continue to do that, and to allow yourself to be shaken where you need to be shaken. Are we good to go? The technology's working. So, I just want to start. There's a story in the Bible that probably for the past 25 years has always raised a question for me. And it's the same question. Story that you would know well, where Jesus feeds 5,000 people. And the story goes that Jesus was actually aiming to get a bit of time out, trying to go to a solitary place. The crowds heard that he was going to a particular place, so that when he arrived there by boat, there was already a crowd there waiting for him. And it says that Jesus had compassion on the crowd and began to heal the sick. And the record of that account says that there that day were 5,000 men, and that doesn't include women and children. So there are a lot of people there. The question that this has raised for me, and in fact, the crowds that followed Jesus around Judea during his ministry, the question that all of that raises for me is, why did they come? What was it about Jesus that attracted that many people that consistently over a period of 3 to 4 years? Because I don't think Jesus put up posters. I don't think he had his disciples hand out flyers. I think if he had access to today's technology, he probably would have advertised through radio or television or put up an event on Facebook. But people still came. And as we know, Jesus, the physical manifestation of God on earth, the incarnation, has now gone. He ascended into heaven. So for us as the church, who carry on the ministry of Jesus now, we can't rely on Jesus to draw those crowds in. And the crazy plan that God has is he wants to use us to be that incarnation now, that physical presence on earth. But I think we all know how we are day to day and how often we let God down. And I was thinking about this, it would be a bit like me getting my 2 5-year-olds, Henry and Addie, to look after our house. But that's what God chooses to do. It's a crazy plan, because we are now the body of Christ here on earth. We have God's Spirit with us. But it strikes me that the way we try to bring crowds in these days are through things like events, activities, programs, church buildings, church services. But I'm not sure we're drawing in crowds. When I look at how we're going with that,
You turned it on the side?
I haven't turned it on. Not the technology, it's me. There we go. So how are we going in terms of drawing in the crowds? If you look at the stats from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, it shows that in 1966, 88% of the Australian community identified as Christian. By 1991, the figure had fallen to 74%, and in the last census in 2016, it was down to 52%. And on a side note, interestingly, the latest census reveals that Tasmania is the least religious state in the country. I was a little surprised by that. But we still hear stories about church growth. Compare that, though, with the National Church Life Survey, which I believe is still going, which has shown very little change in the number of people who attend church at least once a month in this country. But we hear about church growth, so that's curious. Why are we seeing church growth? So I've pondered that as well. I don't have an answer for that. I know that there are people that change churches probably because they're not happy with something that's happened or they need a change. There's decisions like that. People relocate. They move from one state to the other and join a church. And in spite of my choice of shirt, some people marry into churches, like I did in 1942. So there is that growth that can happen. We see churches in decline. We've had a church in this very community that recently shut its doors. And as everyone knows, we recently opened our doors. So the question remains is, where is everybody? Why do people flock to Jesus when if we're Jesus now on earth, if we're the body of Christ, why do we not see people storming through our doors? And I don't think there's one simple answer to that. And all I want to do this morning is actually throw out an idea, perhaps, something that I've observed, but something I think, as I talk to people around this state in my current job, I'm getting a sense that more people are starting to talk about this. Because I think that one particular answer could be that we need to increase our focus on bringing justice to the world. In Micah chapter 6 verse 8 it tells us that he has shown us what is good. And what does God require of us? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with our God. It's the idea of justice, in fact the acts of justice, I think, were really a hallmark of Jesus' ministry when he was on this earth. In fact, he started his ministry by standing up in a synagogue and speaking these words. The Spirit of the Lord is on me. The Spirit of the Lord is on me.
Oh. You-
Am I going to?
Oh, that's right. They fixed it up the back, obviously.
I'm just relying on you guys up there. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because He's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. His life was one of stepping into people's circumstances and shining justice. Lepers, tax collectors, women caught in adultery, Samaritans. Jesus stepped into those lives with acceptance, without judgment, and brought healing and brought wholeness. He shone justice into the lives of the people that he touched. When it came to the Pharisees and the teachers of the law and the wealthy, Jesus also regularly shined justice into their lives too, but in a very different way, because generally he confronted them with their failure to act justly. But justice was this theme that ran through the ministry and indeed runs through the Bible. One of the things that I am developing a real hope for, and as I said, I'm seeing this a bit as I travel the state, and I see it in this church. And perhaps it's a bit of a vision for what we could be. I would love to see that across this state, all churches, all Christian organisations, all Christians, all of us, would start to work together to act justly, to shine justice into the lives of those that are doing it tough, into the lives of hurting Tasmanians. To do that in such a way that when governments, when community leaders and others look at what we're doing, it's undeniable. They may not agree about our starting point, but it's undeniable that the care we bring to people far outshines the care that they see anyone else bringing in our communities. So I want to take some time, this is a depressing bit, so I'll give you a warning. I feel like it's a bit like, this program contains coarse language, but this is the depressing bit. I want to take some time to look at the state of Tasmania. So what are the needs out there? But from an encouraging perspective, I also want you to be thinking, well, what opportunities does this present for us to shine justice into the lives of people? So I'll run through a few stats. First few stats are on income. The number of Tasmanians living on a welfare payment as their primary source of income in Tasmania sits above the national average. A recent survey by the Australian Council of Social Services from 2019 looked at job seeker recipients who are on the lowest payment and found that of those surveyed, 84% skipped meals to save money, 66% did not use heating in winter, more than half had $100 left per week after housing costs, and more than 1 in 3 young people had to give up their studies through lack of income. And it also feeds into, it's not the only reason, but it feeds into the concept of generational disadvantage. And what I mean by that is households where the economic status, the opportunities do not change from one generation to the other. In fact, it's almost like they're inherited one generation to the next. The ABS develops an index of disadvantage and it splits the country up into 20% blocks from most disadvantaged to least disadvantaged. And 1 in 3 Tasmanians live in that 20% of the most disadvantaged in the country. I don't know if that was me or someone else, but thank you for this. The data from the 2016 census shows that the total number of people experiencing homeless in Tasmania from in the 10-year period over 2006 to 2016 has increased. And young people represent 1/4 of all Tasmanians who are homeless at any given time. 1 in 80 people in Tasmania in 2019 received homelessness services. So that means something's happened in their lives and they need further assistance. Of those, 40% seeking assistance is due to financial difficulties, and 1 in 3 were sadly leaving domestic or family violence situations. And on average, over 1,000 Tasmanian children and young people each night are not able to live in their own homes, and many of those are living in out-of-home care like foster care or kinship care. Anglicares, which isn't up there, but Anglicares do an annual rental affordability snapshot, and last year found that only 11% of properties would have been affordable to households on a welfare payment. And that's affordable. That's not that they would get that. They've still got to go through the hurdles of actually accessing that property again. In 2017-2018, the police recalled that there were well over 5,000 call-outs for family violence incidents and arguments, so that's an average of 15 each day. Consistently, Tasmania struggles with educational attainment, and at the early age of kids in grade 3, we are under the national average for achievement against reading, writing and numeracy. So that has a knock-on effect over the years. Youth unemployment, regularly, we're at the top of that. Youth underemployment is a significant issue, so that's the casualisation of the workforce. So young people who cannot get consistent work, consistent full-time work. In terms of mental health, we have some of the highest rates of people living with mental health issues in the country. And we also have the highest rate in the country of people over 65 years old living alone, which is almost 1 in 2 older Tasmanians. It's not a happy read. But the positive is that there exists in that opportunity. Maybe there is a correlation between currently what the Christian community in this state does in terms of working towards justice for people and the health of the community, or maybe not. But regardless of that, these stats that I've just gone through do present an opportunity for Christians in this state to be a blessing. Whether or not we're contributing to the cause of that, I'm not fussed about. Can we be part of the solution to start to shift this? Absolutely. Because these stats represent real people. These are people that walk the streets alongside us, that live next door to us. So what can we do and how should we do it? And as I said earlier, I don't think it's my job to tell you what to do or how to do it today. That's between you and God. I just want to encourage you to talk to God about it. So I want to tell you a little bit about my journey in this area, in the Clarence Plains area, mix in a bit of the story of Moses, and ask you the question that was up at the start: what is it that you have in your hand? It's about that question, as Dermot showed at the start. I think we'd all agree, that's an amazing story. It's an amazing story. And I think in itself, it's what God is doing in this place, but I also think it acts as a parable or a metaphor for what we do in people's lives. This is about a building project. But I think as Christians we should be in the business of building the lives of those around us. And this morning is about talking about start where you are. So I want to talk about it's a little bit about my personal story, about where I started. As Dermot mentioned, currently I work for Presbyterian Care Tasmania, which has a broad brief to relieve poverty and distress experienced by Tasmanians, and it does this by supporting primarily Christian organisations and churches to do that. It's a great job, one I really enjoy. But previously I was working with Mission Australia Housing, who are the local community housing provider. I didn't start there, however. I started as an operations manager in Mission Australia's state office. And I must admit, when I switched roles from working out of the state office to being based in the heart of Clarence Plains, in fact in the heart of Clarenavar, I think it's just fair to say I didn't want to go there. Bit of honesty this morning. But I have to say too, I was very surprised by that reaction. I'd spent a good chunk of my life working alongside people who were doing it tough, who had challenges day to day. And I actually enjoyed working with the people. So that reaction ran a little bit counter to that. Because I think being in the thick of it, quite literally, that was a step beyond what I'd done before. And I felt God had ordained the move too. There's a whole set of circumstances that led up to that. But in spite of that, my prejudice and lack of faith came to the fore. So I spoke to God and I simply asked Him to give me a heart for the community. And I'm pleased to say He did. And that's also when my learning began. And I think there's three key learnings that I took out of it, issues that I believe underpin the sort of statistics that we see up there. The learnings that I think underpin cycles of disadvantage and generational disadvantage in this state. Because as I said, these stats represent real people. Every percentage, every digit is a real Tasmanian, a hurting Tasmanian, a person who takes their struggles personally and who feels their situation deeply. It's more than just a lack of income. There's a great quote from a poor woman from Moldova, and I think it's relevant to people who live locally as well. Poverty is pain. It feels like a disease. It attacks a person not only materially, but also morally. It eats away one's dignity and drives one into total despair. For me, I think, can I let anyone feel like that? If I've got anything I can do to make someone in that situation's life better in some way by shining justice into their lives, should I not take up that opportunity? Because whilst this is a woman who lives thousands and thousands of kilometres away in another country, this is reflected in what I saw amongst the people in Clarence Plains. And I want to just run through the part one of what I learnt, and this is tying into the things that I observed. So I came to understand that many of our struggling Tasmanians have had their dignity stripped away. I'd heard of postcode discrimination where people actually put a different address on their resumes because they know that employers at times discriminate against applicants based on where they live. I was aware of terms like bogan, dole bludger and household that were regularly applied to people living in disadvantaged suburbs. But some new things hit my radar. The relentless stigmatisation that comes through social media of certain suburbs. If you like the Facebook page Vigilante News, you'll see that coming through quite clearly. I heard of developers who would create a subdivision and actually ask for their subdivision to be relocated in a different postcode. Or to build a hard fence at the edge of their subdivision so there was less chance of people walking from one suburb to the neighbouring suburb. And probably most sadly, I heard of a survey that was done locally where a number of local residents actually said they felt shame living where they were. They'd actually internalised it to a point where they actually felt bad about that. Not that it was just their circumstance, but they felt shame about where they lived. And that challenges me as a Christian because aren't we made in the image of God? Isn't that the very first thing that the Bible tells us? And aren't we all fearfully and wonderfully made, as it says in Psalm 139? So I'm challenged, what can I do? What can I do to bring dignity to people?
Yeah.
Secondly, I discovered in this community there's a core group that would be the envy of any community, people who would rally, who would speak up for their neighbours, who would fight to get the best for this community. I discovered that strength was a key value to the people that lived around here, which was fantastic, but at a deeper level, and like in nearly all communities, there were still many who were missing out, who were isolated, sometimes targeted by other members of the community who did not see their value as personal. These were isolated people who had no one to encourage them and support them through life's battles. But aren't we all created for relationship with God and with others? Was Jesus' ministry not one of reconciliation? And is that not our ministry now as the church? So again, I was challenged, what can I do? And the third thing I observed was a community and individuals who'd lost all belief of a better future. They'd had it kicked out of them. It was a community that experienced organisations that had come and gone, and with that a whole swag of broken promises. It was a community that experienced people coming in and telling them how to live their lives. And it was a community that experienced a subtle but very deep lack of interest in who they were. And to me, this is even more soul-destroying than disrespect, because it was really less about you're entitled to your opinion. It was more about you don't deserve to have an opinion at all.
Yep.
This was a community with many people who believed that the life that they had to live was as good as it got, and that dreams are a hope to be had by other people. I've just failed in my... There we go. All right, I'll do better next time. There's a quote again from someone living in Azerbaijan who actually said that only the well-off truly can believe in tomorrow.
Yeah.
If we are the well-off, and I'm not saying all of us are in this church, but if we are the well-off, is it right that we're the only ones that can truly believe in tomorrow? Does God not have a plan for all people, as Jeremiah said, plans to prosper them and to give them a hope and a future? So again, my question was, what could I do? So there are 5 things that I really learnt again at this time about how I should respond, and they're things that actually are consistently a starting point now in all I do in terms of the work that I do and I try to do in life as well. The first thing is to listen to understand, which is really an antidote to judging. It was about taking time to sit in the mess, to understand when people had things going on that weren't going well. What was going on for them? What was really happening for them? Because judgment is a dangerous thing, and I'll give you a couple of examples that I observed. As I said, I was working for a community housing provider, so we conducted property inspections, and there were a number of families we'd go to and the property was consistently an absolute mess. And we'd say, look, you need to do some work to tidy this up, to fix up the state of your house. And we'd go back and it'd be exactly the same. So we actually employed someone to go in and just to tease this out a bit more, quite literally sit in the mess, I guess. But what she found was really interesting. There were a number of people, they weren't being lazy, they weren't being difficult. They did not know how to clean a house. And this goes back to the generational disadvantage. They'd grown up in homes where no one cleaned the house.
Yep.
They didn't know about cleaning products. They didn't know about what to use to clean. And then they didn't know how to use all of that to actually do the cleaning. So this person took some time to actually help them clean. And it transformed their lives in a number of cases, because it's not that they didn't want to, it's that they didn't know how to. But someone had to take the time to sit with them to understand that.
Yep.
And a second question from a cooking program, again locally, was a woman who started, a parent, who was known for not really providing healthy food for the kids, was discovered she didn't know how to chop an onion.
No.
So she participated in a cooking course. Now not only can she chop an onion, she can cook a very mean spaghetti bolognese, and she's having people around for dinner.
Yeah.
Life transforming.
Yeah.
But this is not difficult stuff. This is not stuff that you go, well, you know, you look at someone going, oh, well, they're really good at what they do, so they need to leave it there. This is stuff that people, all of us, can contribute to in people's lives. Second thing I learned was that I needed to deliberately connect, not let happy coincidence drive who I was connecting with. But if I saw someone that I thought God was leading me to connect with, I needed to be deliberate about that. And not to make that connection as an expert either. As I said, not to come in to someone who can't chop up onions and go, well, my job is to fix that. But to go in as an equal, as a friend, to see someone in the image of God, someone with dignity, and actually connect with who they are. A guy I'm getting to know reasonably well, called Andrew Hillier, is the CEO of Devonport Chaplaincy. And they run a number of social programs. And he's starting to talk about the R value, which is the relationship value in all that they do. He doesn't want to just run a program. He really, if he's running a program, then he wants to ask the people running it What is the R value that you bring into this? How are you building relationship through what you do? And that stuck with me because I think it's a really just simple way to think about things. What is the R value? I mean, we talked earlier in the announcements about some programs coming up. So for all of you that attend, take that into that place. What's the R value that I bring while I'm here? How am I building relationship?
Yeah.
I learned the importance of treating others as I want to be treated. Hands up people who like telemarketers. Part of the reason I think we don't like telemarketers is because they always ring us up and tell us what we need, what we should do, how we should live our lives. So if ever you find yourself doing that with someone else, just ask yourself the question, am I treating this person as I want to be treated? In fact, if you look at Philippians chapter 2,
No, they do it.
they're doing it for me. I owe on coffee at some point. In Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, it says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. So start with the interests of others. Don't come in with an agenda, because you don't like it when it happens to you. So don't do it to other people. It's a simple thing. I'm guilty of it, so I've got to remind myself of that constantly. Fourthly, I've learned to cultivate optimism. You know, love is patient, and people let you down. So what I've learned to do is try to always remain optimistic about what people are capable of and not give up, which is not always easy, and sometimes I do. But to continue to try to develop that art of being optimistic. And finally, I've learned the importance of active encouragement. The more I'm involved in social programs, the more I believe that encouragement is lifeblood to people. Everyone loves to be encouraged. People need, particularly people who've lost all self-belief, need people to come and go, you can do that, I know you can do what you want to do. What is it you want to do? I reckon you can do that. I'm here for you to support you to do that. Keep going, keep pushing through. What do you need? You know, and to really be that. We all love people encouraging us. So again, it's about treating others as we want to be treated, to really encourage other people as well. So what can we do, you and I, to tackle poverty of resources and of spirit, and to shine justice into the lives of Tasmanians? Because the statistics can be overwhelming. But the story of Moses gives us an interesting framework for thinking through this. If we go to Exodus chapter 4, verses 1 to 5, in the chapter preceding this, Moses experiences a burning bush, and God is in that. And God tells him, look, I've got a simple task for you. I want you to lead over 2 million Israelites out of Egypt and take on the local king of the day. Sounds quite simple, really. So start where you are. So Moses, of course, goes on to say, well, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? And the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? A staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail, which is a bit of a test of faith as well. I'm not sure. I've been very excited about doing that. So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake and turned it back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. So it was a simple thing. God didn't say go out and get something else, or go out and get some training, or go out and do any number of things. He started with, what is that you have in your hand? God kept it simple. And it doesn't need to be complicated for any of us. In fact, we probably overcomplicate it. We try to go big too early. We try to go, well, the problem is, why don't we create this great program to address family violence in this state? No, start where you are. think about what is that you have in your hand right now. Is it time? Do you have some time that you can spend? Is it relationships? Who's God been poking you about that you need to get in touch with because you know that they're doing it tough? Is it resources? Looked at some of the statistics up there and around unemployment. Do you have a business where maybe you could take on a trainee or an apprentice or someone with work experience? Looked at housing. Do you have an investment property that when the tenancy you've got in that ends, you could potentially look at offering it as a social property where you're looking at charging a percentage of income market rent? Is it about encouragement? What can you do this morning, out when you're having coffee, to encourage the people that you're talking to? It might be something simple like that. It might be something bigger. That's a conversation between you and God. And I want to speak, there's a few of us here, like myself, that are privileged enough to be paid to do some of this stuff. Can I say that's not enough? For me, the challenge for me is to ask myself the same question. Forget the work that I do, what do I have in my hand that God's talking to me about now? So if you're in the business, it still applies to you. In fact, you're probably not going to get your reward in heaven for that because you're already getting paid now. So who is God tapping you on the shoulder about outside of your work that you might need to be connecting with? So I want to leave you with this. If you're wondering on that too, how much of your time, your money or other resources you should give, well, I'll leave it to C.S. Lewis, who will articulate it much better than I could about perhaps what's expected. C.S. Lewis says, I do not believe one can settle how much we ought to give. I'm afraid the only safe rule is to give more than we can spare. In other words, if our expenditure on comforts, luxuries, amusements, etc. is up to the standard common among those with the same income as our own, we're probably giving away too little. If our charities do not at all pinch or hamper us, I should say that they are too small. There ought to be things we should like to do and cannot do because our charitable expenditure excludes them.
Yep.
It's challenging words. I don't think I make the mark for that. So to get back to the very start, I believe in this state, and I'm not just talking to all of us here, I'm not just talking to myself, but across this state, as Christians, we are better together. And I believe that if we more clearly stepped into bringing justice to the state that we live in, it would make, well, I know that would make a massive difference to those that are on the receiving end of that justice. But I also believe that it's the sort of thing that would start to bring people into the community because they see what we do and they want to be part of that. And they will come at times simply for healing and other things, but very personal things. I think we are in a position in this state to create a flood of just acts. That we can every day be involved in individual responses that bring justice to those directly in our world and to be part of bigger collective responses, as Dermot said. To create a network of justice that will bring God's blessing to the Tasmanians in need across this state. So I want to just leave with some encouragement this morning before we get to next week where we'll have some more encouragement. Because in spite of all the brokenness in this world, we still serve an almighty God, a God who is in control. We serve a God who wants this much more than any of us could want it. We have a God who wants to use us, his children, as ridiculous as that may seem. And he wants to use us in ways that each of us are perfectly suited to. We are all fearfully and wonderfully made as individuals. We are all different from each other. But it's in that collective response that the beauty comes, the justice comes, that justice is shone into people's lives.
Mm.
We serve a God who does this with us. We're not alone. The Spirit of God is with us, guiding us, inspiring us, bringing power and discipline and love into the work that we do. And at the end of the day, we serve a God of agape, of unconditional love, who loves us, all of us, despite our own brokenness and failure. So that's the encouragement. I believe we can make a difference. So I really want to encourage you to all think about what is it that you have in your hand over the next week. And as I said, it's going to be a lot more positive next week because we're going to talk about what some people are doing in that space. But to appeal to everyone who's probably my age and above, next week in the words of Olivia Newton-John, let's get practical.
You changed the word.
Sorry, I apologise. I had to end with a dirt joke. All right, so can we pray?
Yep.
Father God, it is a great mystery that you choose to use us. But we are your children, and you do love us unconditionally. I thank you that you are a God of love and a God of justice and a God of mercy. And I pray that we all, every day of our lives, in every situation, can be instruments of that love and justice and grace, that we could bring those into the lives of those around us. But also to, across this state, that we, as your children, could find ways to work more harmoniously together, to work more seamlessly together, that we would shine the light of your justice, shine the light of your unconditional love to all Tasmanians, and that we could be part of your plan to transform this state. So, Father, I thank you that you are with us. You don't leave us alone. As in the way that you walked with Moses and the Israelites for 40 years through the desert, you do the same with us every day. I thank you for your faithfulness, and I pray that you would give us all the gift of faithfulness to offer you in return. Thank you, Father. In Jesus' name, amen.